how to be a better person and how to do better, following a moral code. Who is God? Why did God create you? What is the purpose of man? The church teaches you how to be a better person and how to do better in relation to your neighbor. It tells you the ultimate goal is the salvation of your soul. That's the whole point of having the Catholic faith, is to save your soul. We are talking about virtue, and the questions I have for you and for your audience, those watching us, is what is virtue? And when you hear the word virtue, what are the things that come to mind?
So the first thing that comes to mind for me when I hear the word virtue is that the root word ver means man. And so when I learned about virtue and what it means and why it's important to be virtuous, really what comes to mind is that it's part of a man's purpose to be virtuous. It's why man is in the root of it. So
that's exactly it. And you will spell it with V-I-R, that's in Latin. And that's why in English you have the word virile. Virile, it looks very virile, very manly. And when we talk about purpose, that's a philosophical concept. What is the purpose? And we can look at it later. And what is the purpose of man? What is the purpose? And that is connected to the idea of, in antiquity, whether it's Plato or Socrates or Aristotle, when they talk about what is the purpose of this object? What is the purpose of this, of man? And that's what they refer to as virtue. What is the virtue of the pen? What is the virtue of this glass? What is it meant for? And obviously the purpose of this glass is to contain liquid, and the purpose of the pen, it will be to write. And then they extend that to what is the purpose of man? What are we were created for? What purpose? And then how do we achieve that? Because a pen, if the pen doesn't write or the glass is broken, then doesn't serve that purpose. The virtue is being broken. So the same with man. And another question I have for you, what virtues can you think of? You were talking about what is the purpose, but what virtues, when you think, okay, you have to have these virtues as a man, well, what are the virtues that come to mind?
Well, as a young man learning his catechism, the theological virtues come to mind first. So that would be faith, hope, and charity. And as a man who's looking to be a leader, I would say the 4 cardinal virtues also come to mind. So that would be prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice.
That's exactly it. And those virtues, the cardinal virtues, these called cardinal because those are like a hinge at the door. Other virtues are dependent on those. The justice, the concept of justice, the concept, the virtue of prudence. You have to be prudent as a man. You have to watch out how you speak, what you do, the things you don't do. You have to be prudent in life, right? If you are going to squander your resources or your energy. And then we can talk about the vices, because they are virtues, but they are also vices. And that's what usually the church, based at times in antiquity, in philosophy, they talk about what are the virtues, and those are the 4 cardinal virtues: justice, prudence, temperance, to be temperate. And temperance is self-control. I was asking somebody the other day, what do you think about temperance? And he was saying, well, what's temperance? Well, self-control. And temperance is also applies to in life, work. If you're a father, mother, or at work, you have a purpose. You have to finish your assignment, your essay, your project. In life, if you have a child, you have to make sure that the child is being looked after. You cannot say, you know what, I'm going to go on holidays and you are 2 years old or 2 months old, I'm going to leave you alone. You have to exercise that, not only prudence, but also temperance. And you make sacrifices to ensure that the project is finished, the assignment, or your child is being looked after, or your family, or yourself, right? Because even the things we do, the things we eat, okay, if it's going to cause harm, that is, and the concept of harm is also fascinating, because you think, okay, when the church or yourself, when you say this is bad, or society, this is bad for you, smoking is bad for you, with your obesity? Is it objectively good or is it objectively bad? When we talk about things to do with aesthetics, at times you might say, well, I like the blue color, or you say, I like the red color. It doesn't really matter. There are no, objectively, it's not bad or good. Or if you say, I like this word rather than this other word. Oh, okay, well,
Where do you think we draw the line between what's objectively good or bad or subjective?
And then when you can analyze, when we say this is objectively bad, it's because it causes harm. And harm is objective. If you're smoking, for example, 2 packages a day, or if you overeat, let's say that you drink 3 liters of wine in 1 hour, it's going to cause damage. And physically, it's going to cause damage. Or if I defame you, people at times they say, well, that's subjective. And I say, well, let me give you an example with things that we cannot measure. And defaming somebody, lying, right? Somebody says this person has done horrible things, and it's a lie. You are defaming that person. You cannot measure it. You cannot use the scientific method to measure that, but that defamation is going to cause damage. I might make you lose your job, or your family, or your children, and you have caused damage. And this is something that you can see the consequences of that. So that's why we say defamation in law, in morality, in law, because it's based on morality, they say, no, you cannot defame somebody. You might say, well, I have freedom of speech. Sure. But the minute you defame somebody, you are going to cause damage. So as a society, using morality, we have to protect the good name of people. And that's also something that the Catholic Church says, that everybody has the right to the good name of that person.
But what if you are not knowingly defaming someone and you're simply telling someone else the truth about someone without necessarily saying anything that's untrue about them?
If it's the truth, then it's not defamation.
Okay.
If it's the truth. But I know what you're getting at. If you say, do you know about so-and-so? And it's true, for example, an accountant. So, well, you have to watch out because he is he's doing dodgy things, and he's cooking the books, and he's not an honest accountant. And it might be true. And if it's true, well, it's true. But then the church also teaches about trying to bring down the good name of somebody. Detraction. It's called detraction. You are detracting. And it's true. But then the question is, okay, does this person need to know? You know a lot about your neighbors, but if I don't know your neighbors, do I need to know about your neighbors? Now, if I'm going to contract this accountant, and you say to me, Jesus, be careful with this accountant because he has already been defrauding lots of clients, and you are going to contract this accountant, in that case, you are protecting me. And in that case, that would be relevant. But if you are detracting the good name, I have a good name, a good image of somebody, one of your neighbors. But I don't need to know what he did or she did in her past. Because then I have a good name, they have a good name, and then you are detracting. But I don't need to know that because I'm not going to employ them, I'm not going to relate to them. And at times we see that in the media. You open the newspapers every morning, and then there's something about somebody usually famous, an actor, an actress, a politician, and what they did might be true. But do I need to know? And if I have a good image of that person, that is what is called the detraction.
So what you're saying is it really depends on the context of which you need to know something or to share it with someone else.
At work is very much the same all the time. Everybody has their own different situations in life. Nobody's perfect, but then among colleagues, do you need to know what's going on because otherwise you wouldn't have the right to a good name, right? And the question is, do you need to know?
Right. So maybe this kind of ties back to the ideas of maybe prudence or temperance.
Right.
Where you don't want to solicit information from someone that you don't need to know. So maybe that's temperance. You're not trying to get information out of them that really you don't need. And then there's also the prudent decision in conjunction with that, where you don't want to share certain information with other people who don't need to know it. But then there might be those cases like the accountant who's defrauding people, where you actually have a duty to share that information with others because that would be protecting them. So we can kind of start to imagine where we draw the line with these things. We want to share information if it can measurably protect other people, but we don't want to share information if the cost of doing that outweighs any perceivable benefit. So if that information is just going to cause someone to lose a job or lose opportunities, then we don't want to share that information with other people if that would be the end of doing that.
And by doing that, by exercising prudence, for example, we are using a moral code. We are saying, am I supposed to do this? What are the consequences? And it's a good standard to have. If I do this, what are going to be the consequences? Why do I want to do that? Is it because I want to harm the other person by spreading, at times something is true, but that information that it might affect in a negative way the livelihood of that person, for example? Is it to undermine the person, to attack that person? And that's when we're asking ourselves that, we're using that moral code, that virtue in itself.
Now, thinking about that more, there's certainly instances where there's gray area. So you might have the accountant who's defrauding people, but let's say he's also trying to feed, all 5 of his children. And if he wasn't defrauding people, he'd be failing, and he wouldn't be able to feed his children and support his family. And so what I'm thinking is, on the one hand, what he's doing is wrong, but he's doing it to fulfill a purpose that is noble and just. And let's say that we know that this accountant is defrauding people, but we also know that he's trying to provide for his family and he's in a tough situation, and he'll stop defrauding people as soon as he can make his next monthly payment, right? Like, he doesn't want to defraud people. He's just doing it. And this is completely hypothetical. So let's assume that he's good to his word and he'll stop as soon as he can. What would we do in that situation?
That's a good question, and it happens all the time. You are saying, there are 2 issues. One of them is, can he feed his family in a different way? Does he need to defraud or to commit crime, to kill somebody, or to burn down the property, somebody else's properties, so that he can have access to that house, so that his family can be in that house? One of the principles. So the question is, can he do that in a different way? Most likely, yes. The other principle is, if there is bad or wrong in some parts, then it's wrong in all the parts. The mafia, in their minds, what they are doing is good for them. It's good for the family. They are making those who are, for example, human trafficking. They are making money to feed their families. But then, as a society, we say that goes against one of the principles, that is the common good, and also the basic principle. Is it good in itself? It goes back to the idea of virtue. Is good in itself, intrinsically, is it good? And then when we talk about virtue, and also axiology. Axiology is the science, or the study of value. Axiology. Yeah. It comes from axios, and logy is the study, the area, the field of study. And then you think, okay, the axiology, the value. What is the value of doing something? Is it good in itself? For example, education. You can say, well, is education in itself intrinsically good? Or exercising, is it intrinsically good? Well, yes, we know from science, yes. Or eating healthy. And then if you are going back to the example, the accountant who is going to steal, is stealing in itself intrinsically good? Because then you are depriving, in order for you to provide for your family, you are depriving somebody else resources to maybe to feed his own family or her own family. So in order for you to feed your family, you are depriving, you are stealing from somebody else's ability to provide. So you're already causing damage, you're already causing harm.
That's good.
But the idea of virtue, we talked about this to some extent, it's a trait. It's a trait of excellence. You want to be better and do better. And it goes back to, again, when we say better, in comparison to what? We usually say, this is better, this product, this microphone is better than the other microphone I got 5 years ago. And at times it's objective. Oh, the sound is better, it doesn't fail. There are certain characteristics that we say this is better than. The minute we say better is in comparison, and it's subjective. At times it's subjective. At times it's objective. When we say the car you are driving today is much better than the cars they invented 100 years ago. The computers we use nowadays, they are much better than the ones that they were invented 30 years ago. They are faster, you can do more things, they are quieter, they use less energy. So objectively, you can say this is better. And in life, it's very much the same. The things, how we behave, there are certain behaviors that are better than others. At times, as you pointed out, it is subjective, depending on your background. And that's why even the three of the gifts of the Holy Ghost are knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. You cannot have wisdom without understanding, and you cannot have understanding without knowledge. That's why learning, education is so crucial. And we learn informally and formally. The minute you are born, you are started learning. And we learn, there are three ways we learn. We learn by instruction, by imitation, and by reflection. That's basically it. Somebody has to teach you. The minute you are born, your parents, the adults, are teaching you. When you go to school, the teachers are teaching you. When you're reading a book, the person who wrote the book is teaching you. You're learning through, or you are watching a YouTube video about how to do better, how to be a better person. We usually learn from people who know more than we do. And we learn by instruction. Formally, when you go to a class, for example, you go to university, you go to school formally, or you take a class. And informally, this conversation, we are all learning. When you are taking a walk in the park, you're learning about your environment. You are having a conversation, informally having a coffee with somebody, you are learning informally. And through the experiences. That's why your experience will determine the way you think. Your experiences change the way you think. And if your experiences at times determine and change the way you behave. When you change people's experiences, you change the way they behave.
And then, that's for better or worse, right?
For better or for worse.
Because what I wanted to ask is, just to tie this back to our theme of virtue, is certainly there's the case that we learn towards bettering ourselves, and we're learning things that are good. We're learning to exercise, we're learning to read and write, we're learning to go out and interact with the world. So we're taking in this good information, we imitate some of the good we see, but certainly a lot of the things we learn are bad. So what would you say it means to learn in accordance with virtue? Because oftentimes we learn things, whether we know it or not, that are evil, and we learn things that are really not virtuous at all. Where do we distinguish between learning things that are not good and things that are objectively good? Like, certainly learning to murder and learning different murdering techniques, that's evil. Whereas learning, the catechism, that's good, because you're learning things that are good for your soul. And these are kind of two extremes. Where do you think that line is between learning things that are good and things that we should continue to imitate and understand? And where should we maybe halt our learning of things that are disordered and destructive to ourselves.
When you talk about the catechism, which even the word catechism comes from Greek, and it means oral instruction. So the church put together some books with questions and answers about the doctrine, the Catholic faith, and also how to be a better person and how to do better, following a moral code. And then learning about the tenets, the principles of the faith. Some of the dogmas that, who is God? Why did God create you? What is the purpose of man? And then the church teaches you how to be a better person and how to do better in relation to your neighbor. And there are two principles. Ultimately, the principle, the supreme principle of the church, even in the catechism tells you that, and even in the law of the church, canon law, it tells you what's the ultimate goal is the salvation of your soul. That's the whole point of having the Catholic faith, is to save your soul, to have and then the other thing is the common good. Those are the main tenets. Is the salvation of your soul. If not, then if it wasn't for that, the Catholic Church would be just a non-governmental organization, a charitable organization like any other organization. And our Lord Jesus Christ didn't come to save trees, to save the planet it came to save souls, right? And then the other is also in relation to thy neighbor. And the question is, who is your neighbor, right? And those are the principles when you look at the positive law. It's called positive law because it's been posited. It's been put forward together by men who organize the criminal code. Or when you are driving, you follow certain laws and regulations, and that is called the positive law. And that positive law is very much based on the moral law. And the moral law is very much based on the divine law. The moral law, the natural law. The law that you see in nature. For example, you don't see the animals killing their own babies in the womb, for example. Or there are certain things that by your nature, intrinsically, answers your question is intrinsically, that this is bad. Even when you were a child, you knew that stealing from your brother, your sister, there was something, or there were certain things that you did, or we do, that intrinsically, by nature, that you are not supposed to do that. Slapping somebody or killing somebody or defaming somebody, that you are not supposed to do that. You do it because for different reasons, but we know intrinsically. And the answer your question is discernment. How do you know? Well, you discern. Every morning when you wake up, you know that you have to do certain things in order to achieve your goals. Today, I'm going to interview Jesus. Okay. And what do you need to do to achieve that goal? And then you have to have the equipment, you have to prepare yourself, you have to get up, you have to do certain things. And that's where the idea of the end justifies, the goal justifies the means, that's where it comes from. That is the objectively right way of looking at things. Okay, what's my goal? My goal is to interview today Jesus and to put this on YouTube so that people can enjoy or learn something or appreciate or get entertained. But in order to do that, you have to have so many other steps, so many means. You have to have the microphone, you have to have a computer, and those are the means. You have to physically come to my office to interview me.
And just to harken back to something you said earlier, the means, if we talk about the defrauding accountant, they have to be good. They have to be rightly ordered. If the means, the ends don't justify the means unless the means are also good. Do I understand that correctly?
That's right.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to talk about is you mentioned that you were talking about moral code and divine law. Would you say it's possible for someone to become virtuous and to what extent without following God, without being a Christian, without being a Catholic?
The answer is yes, to be a virtue, you don't have to be a Catholic, because through history we have seen lots of people, even in antiquity and in different traditions, they want to aim for the high goal, to be a virtue person. So in order to do that, yes, you can be a virtue person, but the question is it going to save your soul? Again, when it comes to the faith, you might say, it's good enough for me. In antiquity, Plato or Aristotle, and they talk about this. And even in other philosophical traditions or the Stoics, and even other religions, they say you can be a virtue person even towards your neighbor, precisely towards the neighbor. But the question is it going to save your soul? The Catholic faith says you can only be saved through Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ founded the Catholic Church. So even Siri, when you ask Siri, who founded the Catholic Church? It's Jesus Christ. And that's, again, he uses the Catholic Church as a tool in order to achieve the goal. The goal is the salvation of your soul. And then when it comes to virtue, we talked about the justice, prudence, temperance, fortitude. You have to be, again, life is tough. We are in this valley of tears. As I usually joke, we are not in a journey. When people say, tell me about your journey, and I usually jokingly say, I'm not on a journey, I'm on a pilgrimage. I am a pilgrim. I am not just somebody who takes a trip. And the concept is irrelevant, because when you pay for a trip, you are entitled. Whereas as a pilgrim, you don't feel that you're entitled. You are going through this life that is a pilgrimage with cross, disappointment, sufferings, and it's part of life. And the question is, how do I approach that? And you always have a choice, which is related to one of the questions you were asking. You can do something good or you can do something bad. The minute you open your eyes, you can stay in bed for the rest of the week and then neglect your duty in life. And then you decide, you have free will to decide, are you going to get up? Are you going to get ready? Are you going to do something good? When you are driving, you have the choice of following the rules and be calm if somebody cuts you off, or engage into rage, which is one of the capital vices, one of the deadly sins, or the deadly vices. And even traditionally, the Catholic Church talks about the 7 capital sins or vices, based also on antiquity, because of the consequences, because objectively, those vices, those sins are going to cause damage. Rage is one of them. And then you open the newspaper and you see that somebody literally killed somebody because of road rage. And you think, that could have been prevented. Or somebody says, what did you call me? And then there is rage, and then they kill somebody. So when the Church, Holy Mother Church, says this is a capital sin, is because objectively it's going to cause damage. Yeah. It's going to harm somebody. And
even for the road rager, it's like they probably, when they got out of their car, maybe they were, but there's probably a chance where they weren't intending to kill the other person. It's just that when you allow rage to take over, it blinds your other senses, and you're just, all you feel in that moment is rage, and you're not thinking. You're letting your lower appetite of rage consume your intellect, and now that's doing the thinking for you. So even though he stepped out of the car and maybe he wanted to seriously maim or injure this person, he wasn't looking to murder this person or kill this person. And it just, it's a clear example of how sin can blind us in the moment. He wasn't a murderer or a killer when he stepped out of the car, but just allowing that one instance of sin, now he's killed someone, and that has life-altering consequences.
Hence prudence and temperance. And the question is, how do you exercise prudence and temperance? Well, it's a life commitment. And you have to, that's why from the very beginning at home, when you are a child, you are trying to learn, the parents are trying to teach you to exercise that prudence and also temperance. make your bed, finish your homework, finish your meal. I don't like it, but it's good for you. Eat your vegetables because it's good for you. You, as a child, at times you don't see the long-term consequences, and not only the long-term consequences, the habits. Two characteristics, two conditions for virtue: habit and sacrifice. So to be virtuous, for example, being patient, is a virtue. You are very kind. You are a kind person. So, as I said, the two conditions, one of them is habit. You cannot say, I'm very patient because when I was 6 years old, I did it once. Or I'm very kind, I'm very generous because when I was 7 years old, once I shared my toys with my brother. Well, to be virtuous, you need a habit, right? And how do you develop that habit? By training. Which is not easy. It's every day. When you get up, you think, okay, I have to, at the end of the day, I have to do these tasks. Or I'm going to be kind to the person I talk to in the shop. It's a habit. You don't walk into the shop shouting and screaming and throwing a tantrum, because you have, in your lifetime, you have trained yourself to control your behavior. And then sacrifice. Let's talk about being generous or being kind. Once I was teaching a group of students, and I was talking about this, and one of the students, she was a retired judge, and she said, jokingly, in a facetious way, she was saying, are you suggesting, Jesus, that teaching us is a sacrifice for you? And then I said, well, it is, because it's 7 o'clock in the evening, and I would rather be with my family, with my wife, but I sacrificing that for teaching you, for the sake of teaching you. So in a way, I have sacrificed something that objectively, and my duty is to be with my family for the sake of teaching you. Somebody calls you, a friend of yours, imagine that a friend of yours is going through a tough time, and then you are supposed to be doing other things today, but then Adam, I need to talk to you today. I'm going through this. And you spend 2 hours or 3 hours for the sake of your friend. You don't have to do it. You are doing it out of charity. You are not doing it out of justice. You don't owe that person, but out of charity. Charity comes from Latin, caritas. Caritas means love, for thy neighbor. But you don't have to do it. You don't owe that. But out of charity, you are doing that. But you have sacrificed that afternoon that you were supposed to do other things to look after yourself. Maybe you would have gone you could have taken care of yourself or been with your friends or your family for the sake of your friend. That's part of that virtue, but again, it requires the habit and sacrifice. Because when we think of sacrifice, we think of flogging and you don't have to be suffering physically, but you have sacrificed something.
It's interesting too, because when we think about virtue and sacrifice, one of the virtues I try very hard to work on a lot is on discipline. And one of the struggles, the eternal struggles of discipline is, let's say that you're new to exercising. So just by going to the gym, you've used the virtue of discipline. You've exercised the virtue of temperance. But then over time, now you're in a habit of going to the gym. So going to the gym is no longer training your discipline, and it's no longer training your temperance, because, well, now you enjoy going there. So then you have to figure out, how can I bring that sacrificial aspect back into it? Now I've established going to the gym as a habit, but you know what? Maybe I can grow in temperance and discipline by doing an extra set for every exercise, and then going for 18 reps, not 15, and increasing the weight to grow stronger. I mean, you think about it like, as you exercise and work out at the gym, if you go there and do the same weight without ever increasing the reps or increasing the weight, you're never going to grow stronger. You're going to cap out because your body adapts. But if you continuously change the sacrifice and you add more weight and you add more reps, that's how you grow, because you have to keep that sacrificial element in conjunction with the habit.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, and that is crucial to have that attitude in life. You can read one book, but you can say, I want to do better. I want to aim higher. I want to read now 2 books. Or I want to maybe, traditionally, some Jesuits in the States, they used to have a very good habit, which was to deprive themselves of something they liked. For example, if you like cake, instead of having a whole piece of cake, you're going to have a part of that cake. And the idea is to develop that habit, that sense of discipline, self-discipline. If you say, well, I want to go to the gym, but I want to go at 8 o'clock. Well, I'm going to make that extra effort and I'm going to go at 7:30. Instead of getting up at 8, I'm going to get up at 7:30. Instead of and eating, for example, I don't like garlic, I'm going to try to eat a bit of garlic, unless you have an allergy. But if not, and the idea is that you are training yourself. Nobody's going to force you, but this idea of aiming higher, which is the virtue, which is how we started the conversation, is, you know, deep down, you know that what are the things that are going to make you better. Having conversations, good conversations with certain people.
Like this.
Well, the sinews, like the muscle, the sinews of virtue are good conversation, and good conversations in plural, and also good company. And you know that. So you're going to look for, if you want to fly with the eagles, don't swim with the ducks. And the idea, and you know that, okay, those are the books that are going to help me. These are the videos that are going to help me. Or these are the videos that I'm going to be watching and it's a waste of time. Or the conversation with this individual is going to be literally they are wasting my time. And maybe they are making me sacrifice my session at the gym that I'm supposed to spend an hour training, and I have sacrificed that hour for maybe watching an hour of TikTok videos that are not going to help. So you have sacrificed a good thing, like going to the gym, and for maybe, and you deep down, you know that. But also something you touched on is what is the ultimate goal? To do better. And we know from research, but it's also common sense, but we know from research, when you ask people to visualize yourself what you want to do in a few years' time, and to spend an hour and a half writing down what you want to do in life, how do you want to achieve whatever you want to achieve, success, however, and that's relative, because what is success for one person, for example, being a mother and looking after your family, that in itself could be the definition of success. You have successfully raised your family, looked after your family, and you have brought up a lovely family. Well, you have been successful. Because at times in our society, in our materialistic society, we measure success as how much money do you make, how much junk do you have, how much clutter do you have at home and in the office, and how expensive your piece of metal called vehicle or car is. And that's we usually...
Or plastic these days.
Plastic.
Yeah.
But then you say, well, yes, my own mother was very successful because she raised a family and looked after everybody, and she succeeded in doing that. So when you look at what's the ultimate goal in my life, and obviously every life is different and your circumstances, but you know that in order to do this, I need to do that. For example, when you are at university, okay, what do I need to do to succeed in my studies? What do I want to get out of this? And when you spend an hour and a half doing that, reflecting critically, okay, what do I want to get out of this course, or my job, or my friends? And this weekend, what am I going to do this weekend, and how am I going to fulfill that? And when you think about it, then you are more successful. Studies suggest that when you spend an hour and a half reflecting critically about how you're going to achieve that, it helps you in your life. One of my mottos, and this could be the motto of this YouTube channel, is in Latin, and actually it was the motto of a family in Ireland, and is Quae sursum volo videre. 4 words. Quae, Quae, which means what, and then Quae sursum, and in Latin is Sursum, volo, think of the word volition, what you want, V-O-L-O, volo, videre, and videre with a V, V-I-D-A-R-E. Videre means to see, hence the word video. Video in Latin means I see, I watch.
Oh.
And so, quae sursum volo videre, what does it mean? It means I want to see what's higher, what's beyond. Sursum, even in Latin, at the traditional Latin Mass, you say, sursum corda, lift up your hearts. Corda, plural, comes from cor cordis, means your heart. So the church, and even in the classics, the Greeks and the Romans, they wanted to instruct you to aim higher, to look higher, and to look for things that are going to elevate you. How do we do that? The conversations, how you dress, how you talk, the things you eat, the things you don't eat, the things you read and the things you don't read, because it's not the same. Or the videos you watch and the videos you don't watch. Those are the things that you know that are going to elevate you, to make you a better person. That's why I think it's a beautiful motto. It comes to like Italian motto means a word. So it's the axiom, the adage. Quae sursum volo videre. I want to see what's beyond or higher, to aim higher, basically. Do better and be better.
Briefly, because you mentioned the common good twice in the conversation.
Yeah.
That's it. You said, you mentioned, just in passing, and I thought this was brilliant, you were mentioning good conversation. I want you to explain in a future video. I want to do a full video on what you think it means. Like, what is a good conversation? What's a bad conversation? What's a so-so conversation? Like, I think that's a good thing to... Yeah, because...
Well, that in itself is good. Asking that question and thinking about it, that in itself objectively is good, because it forces us to try to aim higher. Again, when we say this product is better than this other one, this conversation is better. And we eventually, in life, you develop that sense. And it's related to axiology, the value, what makes it something more valuable. What makes this conversation more valuable than this other conversation? Yeah. Or this afternoon, or this friendship more valuable than that other friendship? Or this afternoon more valuable than the other afternoon I experienced the other day? And then every person is different, because we are so complex. Bottom line is, this is something that you develop with training. The same with antiques. You watch these TV programs.
Like Antics?
Yes, yeah. And when you have these programs in Britain and in America, Antiques Roadshow. And then they say, here you have this object. May I ask, where do you got this cup? And then say, well, actually, the value of this cup, how much do you pay for it? Well, I pay for 50 cents. Well, for insurance purposes, this cup is now 17,000 pounds or dollars. Now, this person, this antique dealer knows, or expert, somebody who works in a museum, recognizes the value of that glass. Oh, this comes from the Ming dynasty, and then it goes back to the 17th century, therefore. And then all of a sudden you see the face of this old lady. Oh, I used to use it as an ashtray. The person who is the expert understood, because of, again, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. He has the knowledge to recognize that this cup is from the 17th century, or this painting was painted by Michelangelo. Oh, we used to have it in the back of the kitchen, and they recognize that. And the same in life. You recognize the certain beautiful things. Again, axiology is the science, the field that studies the intrinsic value of things, or extrinsic value, like a suit or a conversation, or a sunset, or there's value in all of that. A painting, visiting a gallery, for example, we place value, or going to, at times, people pay a lot of dollars to see a game, a football game or hockey game. They travel to another country, they spend in the hotel, they spend thousands of dollars in the hotel, the flight, and they have placed value on that. Is it extrinsic? Is it intrinsic? It depends on the individual. Other people are interested in other things, music, for example, and then they will spend 9 years of their lives learning how to play the piano, because as a culture, we value certain things. We value learning languages, we value reading, we value going to taking courses. We place as a society, we value, for example, paintings and art. Actually, the Catholic Church in the 16th century was in the Vatican built the first public museum. And then the Vatican Museum was one of the very first museums, public.
Are you saying there was no museums before the 1600s?
There were some in antiquity. There was some kind of museums, somebody's collection. But in terms of making it public, as we understand it nowadays, access to the public for the common good, for the public enjoyment, we owe that to the Catholic Church.
That's amazing.
Then because of that, some of the popes started doing it in Rome, and then other families, they started doing the Uffizi, for example, in the famous Uffizi, and other in the 17th, 18th century, monarchs, they started developing, and private collectors, they're opening their collections, their private collections to the public. But yeah, in the 16th century was this idea of have public art. Having said that, every time you walk into a church, you have so much art and beauty, which is another science, another field of knowledge, which is philology with a K. Philology is the field that studies beauty. It comes from Greek and it means beauty, so it's the study of beauty. And again,
beauty is a virtue.
And the appreciation, and the question is, how do I appreciate that? Again, it's part of our training, our background, our education, and you have to develop that sensitivity by being exposed to that. It's the same when people say, I love hockey. Okay, how? Because you have been exposed to that. And not only you have been exposed to that, you have spent time, resources, energy, and lots of conversations appreciating, learning about it. And that's why you say, I love hockey, I love music, classical music, or I love painting. Or why? Because we have been exposed to that. We can only understand the things we recognize. Right. That's something that I tell my students. We understand the things we recognize. So you recognize something, the value of something, or the beauty of something. When you say that glass is from the 17th century, it belongs to the Ming dynasty, for example, all of a sudden you have that knowledge, you understand what it means. When you're driving, you see a traffic sign, you recognize what that traffic sign means, and then you can have an understanding what the sign, it's only a sign, it's only signifying something. Then you appreciate the value of that.
It's interesting you mentioned that too. I mean, just talking about beauty as a virtue, there's two things that comes to mind for me, and that is, if you think about all the things that we find beauty in, and even if it's something that we don't understand, like let's say the traffic light, to me as a full-grown adult who drives, I understand that the traffic light serves a function of making sure the flow of traffic continues. But I remember being, a 3-year-old sitting in the back of the car, and I'd see traffic lights, and I kind of knew what they did, but I would never have been able to explain it at 3 years old. Maybe I could have, but to me it was still like this new thing. And the beauty I might find in a traffic light as a 3-year-old might be, I really like the color of that yellow. I really like the color of that green or that red. I like how it looks. We like these things about it without being able to explain it or verbalize it or even understand it. And then when we do at a later age develop that understanding of it, then we can appreciate its intrinsic beauty even more. I mean, a traffic light is kind of, that's one example, but it's the same in art, where I was very fond of Van Gogh's paintings as a child because I liked, and coincidentally enough, you can fact check with my mother, but I liked the swirl of the lines. I could understand that there was a pattern, there was a technique, there was something that really grabbed my eye in that picture. And I was somewhat able to verbalize that, even though I didn't really understand why. Like, okay, there's a pattern, there's these lines. why does that grab my attention? Why is it that I like Van Gogh better than another artist? It's hard to fully understand that, even at my age. I'm not an art connoisseur by any stretch of the imagination. But even something like hockey, as you mentioned, some people just really like watching the game. Well, maybe they haven't really thought about why they like watching the game. Maybe they really like the competition, but then there's also, maybe it's they subconsciously really like to see the players glide on the ice. They like to see the technique that goes into shooting or body checking or all the little small mechanics, the biomechanics that go into the sports and the equipment and the jerseys. There's so much that goes into it. And we can find beauty in all these different aspects as it comes together. Absolutely. As a sport, both functionally, watching the players on the ice, but also bigger than that. Like there's the individual players, but then there's the game. And then bigger than the game is the audience, and there's the fans and the community and all of the principles that go along with that. So you can zoom into the micro level and look at each individual player, and then you can also zoom out and see the whole arena, and there's beauty that can be found.
Beauty, and also one of the values in terms of competitions is that competition. This team or this player wants to be better than this other player. That's why there's a game. Okay, you are going to show by virtue of the game that this team is better than this other team, is going to win the game or the league. And ultimately, we want to see somebody winning. And the idea is they want to be better. What are the characteristics that are going to show, maybe the game, the strategy, the training, and there is value in that. And again, a lot of people place a lot of value and then spend a lot of time and energy because they value that. We want to see somebody exceeding. With the painting, it's very much the same. You're basically telling me that even children, they have an innate sense of beauty that we develop as adults, as teenagers or children, by, again, training and having access to things. When it comes to behavior, there are certain conditions. You have to have the ability in order to develop good behavior and bad behavior. You have to have the ability, the opportunity, and the motivation. So the example you gave me to play, if you want to play hockey or any game or painting, well, do you have the ability to play the piano? Physically, do you have the ability? Or the intellectual ability to learn languages, for example. Some people do, some people don't. If you were born handicapped, mentally handicapped or physically handicapped. So do you have the ability? Then do you have the opportunity? I would like to learn piano, but I don't have access to teachers or piano. Well, then it will be more difficult, more challenging. And then the motivation. And we know from research, the more motivated you are, the better you learn. So when you say, I want to do better in life as a man, as a gentleman, there are many men in society. We need more gentlemen and many guys. And I usually jokingly, but at the same time, seriously, I say we need more gentlemen because, again, it's this idea of aim higher. The normal, the ordinary is all around us. We are supposed to be extraordinary. And the difference between the ordinary and the extraordinary is that extra step that you take, the way you treat, if you are in customer service in a shop or your clients, that extra step that you do at home. Yes, you can do the minimum, but in order to get the maximum, you have to do the minimum, but then do that extra step. How you talk to somebody, how you dress, all those virtues that we are talking about they've been talking about it. I think is that the virtue is that extra that is going to make you an extraordinary person.
Yeah. So I think we should probably start to wrap up with this last question. I wanted to ask, what is the point of virtue? We've talked about virtue. We've talked about how it applies in everyday life. We've certainly covered the importance of virtue in our life. what would you say we can do in everyday life to exercise virtue? Now, one of the things you mentioned is that especially we need motivation in order to learn something. I think we often find motivation when we have the discipline as well. I think discipline and motivation go together because you're not always going to be motivated. And it's on those days that you're not motivated to do something that you should do that you need discipline, because discipline is that virtue of sacrifice. It's, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway because I know it's good for me. And that's where I think we can really work to develop a virtue holistically. It's making the habit of sacrifice. So, I mean, it could be something like if you're not well trained in virtue, it's if I play 1 hour video games a day, well, maybe I'll do half hour and then spend the other half hour reading. I don't really want to read. I'd rather play video games for an hour, but it would probably be good for me if I did video games for half an hour and then did half an hour of reading. And then if you're further along in your development of that virtue, then maybe instead of exercising for 1 hour, I'm going to exercise for 90 minutes. And I'm going to make sure that I have time to stretch at the end, or, do that extra, not just doing the ordinary, but the extraordinary, as you said.
And that's the crux of the matter. How do we develop that sense of commitment, motivation? And it's complex. It's your personality, your previous experiences, your background, but also the self-discipline. And the question is, it's a vicious circle to some extent. How do you develop that self-discipline? By exercising, when you develop a habit and taking the steps, baby steps at a time, you develop a good habit or a bad habit. And then it's easier to get that motivation. If you are, let's say that you're interested in paintings or learning a language, it's okay, you are going to, every day, you are going to study for half an hour, or that half an hour becomes an hour, or that an hour becomes an hour and a half that you're going to spend learning a language or going to the gym or reading a book. And then it's easier. So in a way, it's a virtue circle, not a vicious circle, but a virtue circle, because it feeds into something good. And again, going back to how we started the conversation, you develop a sense of what is good, but again, is the knowledge, and then that knowledge gives you understanding, and that understanding is going to lead you to wisdom in life of, what is good and what is higher, aiming higher. And it's a lifetime commitment. And the idea is, bottom line is, the good for yourself. You can only look after other people and care for other people if you can care for yourself and look after yourself. And if you have those virtues, you can then share those virtues with other people. Whether they appreciate it or not, that's a different matter. But at least you know that what you are doing is good. And then the idea is the common good. It could be for yourself, for your friends, your family, your community, a small community, and then ultimately, as a Catholic, the salvation of your soul.
Bang on. Okay, I think that's a wrap.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam. And remember the motto, Quae sursum, volo videre. I want to look to see what's higher, what's beyond.
Absolutely.
Great.
And yes, keep growing in virtue.
That's it.
All
Thank
right.
you.